Hey there, kids. I'm now ready to read chapter 12 in the Oddmire book 1, The Changeling. Whoa, that's what it looks like. Chapter 12. Cull waited. He sat with infinite patience on the soggy log, waggled his calloused green toes, drummed his fingernails on the mossy wood. He waited. Gradually, his patience became somewhat less infinite. In fact, it began to grow decidedly finite or finite. He was tucked out of sight of any accidental observer unless they were to march directly up the ancient path, and even then they would need to be nearly on top of him before he would be spotted. There was no way to stumble upon the hidden bridge unless you were goblin born. There was magic involved, yes, but it was much more elegant than that. The goblin ward was nothing more than a subtle nudge. The real artistry was in the angles, however one approached the bridge. Excuse me. Every instinct pulled the traveler away. Seeking good fortune, the clearings to either side looked so much more promising. Avoiding trouble, the path that led to the bridge looked trickiest and wildest. Seeking to explore the unknown, there appeared to be nothing down this route but mist and mire and a dull, dead end. Cole waited. His changeling would come. The wee goblin child had worn those human eyes for so long, he might not even remember how to be a goblin. But underneath his glamour, a goblin was still a goblin. He was still kin. He had to feel the pull. This path was still his heritage. It would call to him. And of course, failing all that, he had the map that Cole had drawn. Yes, he would meet the child here, where Chief Ned could hardly accuse Cole of crossing into human lands, and he would march the changeling back into the horde with his head held high. Finally, after all these years, they would be happy to see him. Cole waited. Annie Burton ran along the forest path. It had not been hard to follow the thick, muddy footprints from the creek at the narrow trail. The jagged sea carvings she continued to spot in the tree trunks along the path reassured her that Cole had definitely been this way, and whatever Cole had gone, Tin had surely followed. More than once the path faded, erased by the encroaching forest, but she was able to find signs of the boys again each time. Now and then she would hear a sudden flutter of wing beats or a roar in the distance, and each sound made her heart skip. After she had been searching for what must have been hours, the footprint seemed to veer off the forest path, and Annie pressed through the underbrush until she saw a wide, misty swamp stretching out before her. Surely her boys knew better than to go anywhere near the Oddmire. Her eyes continued scanning the ground for trampled grass or broken twigs or marmalade. At the foot of a sticky log lay her crumpled yellow dish towel. Annie snatched it up. It was muddy and covered in crumbs and sticky orange jam. She peered around. The grass was a mess of recent impressions. Familiar shoe prints overlapped with the marks of enormous paws. The forest spun around her, and she took slow breaths. She tried to see where the prints led, but they all seemed to double over themselves in a meaningless knot. Finally, she spotted a paper caught in the branches of a little bush. Its edges were flapping in the faint breeze that came rolling off the mire. She picked it up and unfolded it. On one side was a note. It began, "Once upon a time." On the other side was a crudely drawn map. The changeling should have come along hours since. Cole had promised Chief Ned he would not go to the boy, promised on his goblin heart that he would not steal, summon, or even speak to the children as long as they remained within the safety of the human town. Goblin promises are more powerful than human ones. It had only been through Cole's painstakingly creative interpretation of his own oath that he found it possible to come so close. If the boy came to him, well, then there's no promise broken. Time was no longer running out. It was out. Cole jumped down from the damp log. He was just going to have to. Footsteps thudded through the bracken ahead. Cole's ears perked up. He was here. After 13 miserable years, something in Cole's wretched life was going to go right. He stood up straighter, adjusted his manky, matted vest. He put his hands behind his back. then held them at his sides instead. He considered leaning nonchalantly against the log, then decided against it. Deep breath. This was it. At last the arrival exploded through the leaves, a tattered goblin map clutched in her hands. Cole stared at the woman, who stared back at Cole. And that is the end of chapter 12. And here's a picture of chapter 13. Here we go.